and the shadow looming over me, its presence so dense it swallowed the air.
Didn't you want to see what I look like?
I have no doubt that he was downright evil.
I won't burden you with every detail because the story would stretch on longer than I care to recall, but I need to tell you what happened, what we unleashed. In middle school, my friends and I became obsessed with the Ouija board. Sometimes we made our own, other times a friend brought a real one. We played at lunch, laughing, daring each other, asking to speak with lost relatives. It was mostly innocent. Nothing ever really happened. Until one day we decided to abandon the safety of names. We didn't call upon a specific spirit, we simply opened the door. I don't remember much of that session, only the suffocating weight of fear. Something unnatural filled the air around us, heavy and watching. And then we panicked. We ripped our hands away from the planchette without saying goodbye. That's when it began. A shadow, a black, chaotic mass with jagged, curling horns and eyes like molten embers. It stalked my periphery, always just beyond my ability to look at it directly. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a product of overactive imagination. But then the dreams started. Every night, the same dream, black and white, a suffocating silence, and the shadow looming over me, its presence so dense it swallowed the air. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move, and then it took my eyes, it didn't rip them out, it didn't gouge. They simply ceased to be. My friends had the same dream, and then the scratches appeared. Random, deep gashes across our backs and shoulders, like something had raked its claws against our flesh while we slept. The sense of being watched never faded. We were never alone. One of my friends went to a psychic. The moment she stepped into the room, the woman recoiled. She didn't need to be told anything. "Something is with you," she said. "It's connected to you." We tried protection spells. We abandoned the Ouija board, terrified of whatever we had let in. But fear breeds recklessness. On one of the final days of school before summer break, we convinced ourselves we needed answers. We made another Ouija board. Just scraps of paper arranged in the back of class while the teacher played a video. We called out to the thing that had been following us. The planchette refused to move at first. Then it began darting, violently, persistently, toward the word no. We taunted it, dared it, told it we didn't believe. A crash, deafening, like metal slamming against concrete. It came from the hallway, so forceful the walls seemed to shudder with it. The four of us bolted upright, but no one else reacted. The rest of the class sat undisturbed, oblivious. We had all heard it, but no one else had. We crept into the hallway. That's when we saw the handprints. They covered the ceiling. Hundreds, thousands, pressed flat against the roof in unnatural, impossible places, spanning the full 8-foot width of the hall, stretching endlessly in both directions. A grotesque tapestry of something clawing, reaching, trying to pull itself through. I knew this hallway. I had studied the ceiling for a perspective drawing assignment a month earlier. The handprints had not been there before. But now they were burned into the very fabric of the school. They never faded. A year later, they remained. I want to start by saying, this is not my story. It belongs to my aunt. It happened in Mexico sometime in the 1980s. My aunt was a wild one, rebellious, reckless, and always hungry for a thrill. My mom, on the other hand, was her polar opposite, the timid, rule-following little sister who never dared step out of line. One afternoon, my aunt invited some friends over. My mom, ever the annoying tag-along, insisted on hovering around them. It started off harmless, flipping through magazines, doing each other's hair, gossiping about school. But then, one of the girls reached into her bag and pulled something out. A crudely made Ouija board. Laughter bubbled up among them, eager and excited, all except for my mom, who immediately went cold. She told them it was a bad idea, that they shouldn't mess with things like that. But they only rolled their eyes, brushing off her fear like it was nothing. The game began. They weren't serious about it, of course. They giggled as they asked questions in mocking voices. "What's your name? Why won't you talk to us? Are you shy? What do you look like?" But nothing happened. The board sat still, unmoving. Eventually they got bored and tossed it aside, moving on like it was just another silly game. Then came the night. Somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, my aunt jolted awake, her stomach twisting with a sick, suffocating dread. It was the kind of fear that doesn't come from a bad dream, but from something else, something real. She lay on her side, facing the wall, her back turned to the darkened room, and then she realized she couldn't move. Sleep paralysis wasn't new to her, but this was different. This was worse. There was a weight in the air, pressing down on her chest, making her breath shallow and ragged. Her skin prickled as the feeling in her stomach only grew heavier, like something was in the room with her. Then she felt it. The mattress dipped, slowly, steadily, as if someone was sitting down right beside her. She tried to scream, tried to twist away, but her body wouldn't obey. She was trapped, locked inside herself, helpless. Her pulse pounded in her ears, her breathing turned into frantic, shallow gasps. And then, a voice, male, cold, and impossibly close.
"Turn around. Didn't you want to see what I look like?"
The tone was taunting, cruel, a perfect echo of the way she and her friends had mocked the board just hours before.
"Turn around."
A few agonizing seconds passed, thick with suffocating silence. Then, with every ounce of strength she had left, she finally managed to do the only thing her body would allow. She screamed. The lights flipped on. Within seconds, her siblings and parents were by her side, shaking her, asking what was wrong, but she couldn't speak, could only gasp for air, her body shaking uncontrollably. By morning, she dismissed it as a nightmare, a terrible, vivid nightmare. But she later pulled my mom aside and told her everything. Every word, every moment.
My junior year of high school, I went to a party where the host eventually brought out a Ouija board. I was into paranormal stuff then, but I didn't know the dangers one of those boards could hold. Typical questions were asked, but it started to get incredibly dark in my vision. Even though lights were on, it didn't seem to help any. The last question was, how old will I be when I die? Everyone got traditional numbers, except for me. It just went to 0, then 1, then 0, then 1. It bounced back and forth between those two numbers until someone just shook the piece and said it was being stupid. At that point, I just stopped playing. It creeped me out. I have a pretty good sense of things I can sense and normally see beings or ghosts. There was one that showed up to me during one of my classes not even a few weeks later. At first, he felt like comfort, like a protector, but I would learn that was not the case. Weird things in our home would happen. Drawers opening, whispers, shadows, lights in places where they shouldn't be, books moving. At night, it would be worse. He would stand in front of my door, and the fear would just ooze out of him, and his form would change. I have no doubt that he was downright evil. I began to deal with this for a couple of years till I met my now husband. We got our first home, and things began to escalate. Now, keep in mind we had a small rental, about 400 square feet total, so standing in the living area, you could see really any point of the house. In their footsteps, breathing, whispers became the norm. At the time, my soon-to-be husband was a practicing Wiccan and had blessed our home, but forgot about the porch and outer walls. We would hear scratches on the walls, knocking on the door and windows. People had felt the entity attachment as a shadow, and Everyone stated he was tall and built like a brick house, that he felt just outright bad and would always go back into the room I was in. My husband had tried to banish him, and it did not go well. You see, my husband worked the closing shift and would get home about 3:30 a.m. There was a road he would have to take that was very haunted as well. Lots of accidents, and right next to it, a good-sized river. One night, he got home and he was extremely pale and sweating. I knew something happened, but he wouldn't tell me, as at the time, he didn't want me to worry. After about a week, he finally told me. That night, when driving on that road, his brakes failed and he couldn't stop. He was going about 60 miles per hour, and the wheel began to jerk out of his hands towards the river. He had to use all his strength to keep that car on the road, which was curvy already to begin with, because the wheel was just yanking so hard towards the river. But guess what? The brakes were fine the next day, and the wheel was not having any issues. When he told me this had happened, I finally said that enough was enough. If evil could exist, so could good, and I started taking him with me to a church that my parents were going to. I gave myself to God, told the entity that it was not welcome and needed to leave, and the hauntings stopped. For the first time in years, my home was quiet, and it has stayed that way, even though I have stopped going to church for the most part. We no longer live in that house and have even moved out of state, but even our new home is quiet and kind. The only spirit that visits is my fur baby Solo, who we said goodbye to last year. From my experiences, don't play with Ouija boards. It nearly cost my love's life in the long run.